Welcome to the show today. This is the second installment on our book, Etherization of the Blood. And usually we go into deeper secrets, and that's what we title it, Deeper Secrets of Etherizations of the Blood, with myself and with my good friend, John Barnwell. Welcome to the show today, John.
Well, hello again, Douglas. And of course, kudos go out to your amazing wife, Tyler, Dr. Tyler Gabriel. And she gives a great deal of insight within her book on the Sophia. And why is that, And you have to do with what's called in Rosicrucian circles, the chemical wedding. And that there's this marriage that takes place. And it's on, Rudolf Steiner says that whenever they mention the feminine, that they're referring to the soul. And that you have that whole idea of the mingling of the soul and spirit, that's what brings about this whole transformation. And for those of you that are out there and you're Christians, don't forget that ultimately what we're talking about is the resurrection. What is the resurrection process? And this is the kind of schematic of the actual process of resurrection. And it's laid out in her 3-volume series. It's the ultimate book in the series that Douglas and I have been working on, is this particular volume that we're talking about, the etherization of the blood.
Glad you mentioned that because I forgot it. Tyler Gabriel has chapters on the endocrine gland system, earthly and cosmic nutrition streams, the etherization of the blood, the tongues of flame, Sophia, the etherization of the blood, the Eucharist, the spiritual nutrition, Vajrayogini's tantric wisdom. I referenced that in the first talk. And these things in here, and then it goes into a clear. This is the part I helped on. I helped give some of the mechanical, very scientific stuff about plasma generators in the human body, brain waves and stuff, and and the 3 fields of force. So, which we call these fields of force. That's where everybody's going. Oh no, everything's a field of force now, and then it's morphic resonance, like they always knew this. You guys, scientists are the most silly people. They are the most uneducated people I've ever met in my life.
But see, again, that's the rub, because they want to reduce everything. It's a field, It's like, what's a field? That's their brain. Their brain's a field. I mean, we're talking about the basically the robes of supersensible beings, right? That when Rudolf Steiner talks about Earth evolution, and he says, a human being, in order to understand a human being, you have the physical, you have the etheric, the astral, and then you have the I. He says, and when he gets into describing human evolution and all the historical stages, what he's talking about is pertaining to the realm of the angels, the archangels, and the archai. Now, if you want to get into an understanding of nature beyond that, then you have to relegate yourself to the higher orders of beings in the schemata of Dionysius, the Areopagite, who ran the esoteric school that was founded by St. Paul in Athens. And so you have Dionysius with the 9-fold schemata of angel, archangel, archai, Kyriotutes, which is your Elohim, Dunamis, Dunamis, Kyriotutes, and then thrones, cherubim, seraphim. But in getting into understanding nature, Rudolf Steiner says what you have to do is you have to bring it into the realm of the Elohim and beyond. So that's the exousiai, that's the spirits of form. And he says that, and when you get into the northern mysteries, where they were dealing with the external expression of experience, Whereas in the Eastern mysteries, it's the internalized aspect of it. But what we're talking about is this interplay between that cosmic realm that's outside of you, mingling with the cosmic realm that's inside of you. And so you have that whole idea that Christ is the orchestrator of this whole symphony of beings, and that there's a picture that it's Christ is the architect. It shows Christ standing like he's giant and he's holding the compass, and he's putting the compass down on a globe, which is the earth. That it's that whole idea that the architect of this experience that we call life is Christ. And if you go back to ancient India, they have the concept of Vishvakarma. Well, what is Vishvakarma? Well, Vishvakarma is the architect. He's the fashioner. And so you have that whole idea of that when you're getting into this process that we're talking about, where you merge your human realm with the cosmic realm, what you're doing is you're creating. You've entered into the realm of the creator beings when you align yourself with the forces that we're talking about here, which we call the moral fire. And that's that moral fire, that's that rosy hued peach blossom with golden radiance that is to be found within the heart. And so that's kind of the image of what Douglas has been attempting to describe in a way that is comfortable for people that want to approach it according to modern science.
Yeah, magenta, Steiner calls it, the color of the human being, magenta, because if you take the Goethean color studies and you work with light and dark, they either create green in the middle or magenta. And so that's either the human or the organic realm of plants and stuff. So when we're talking about the etherization of the blood, there's 1,000 names for this in different cultures, but basically it's talking about what happens when you go from your heart chakra to your throat chakra to your brow chakra to your crown chakra. And there are chemical elements related to that. There's consciousness layers that would be, if Christ sits on your heart, as John just said, we have to have Christ at the center. If Christ sits on your heart, you're a true human. And then you can rise to the realm of the angels, the archangels, and the archai. Imagination, inspiration, intuition, thinking, feeling, and willing are transformed. But they also relate to certain elements. They relate to all kinds of things that are part of people getting the symbols that they need to evoke in them something that is beyond sense perception. Because as long as we use sense perception to describe things that can't be perceived with the common five senses, these are super sensible things we're describing, we won't get anywhere. You can't use earthbound thinking to describe the cosmos. When plasma balls started dropping recently, and they called them drones, these light orbs all over the earth from the clouds, freaked everybody out. Well, they've been around forever. They were here probably before we were, and yet we don't even know they exist. And all the speculation on them, why? Because they were invisible until they decided to turn visible. And what do? What's their characteristic gesture? They defy space and time, consciousness, and they can blink on and off, and they can go faster than anything. No jet can catch them, and it's like they're playing with us. Who are these? Are these beings? What are these? That's Ezekiel's chariot, as we'll describe in a minute. But John put it in a good perspective here.
Foo Fighters.
They're Foo Fighters, they called them in the 50s. They first started calling them Foo Fighters in 1954. And everyone who went up into the air saw these things, and they actually have a policy now on the International Space Station. When they see the bogies, they have to turn the cameras away. That's their policy, because they can't explain it. And what does science do? They put a name on something. It's a field. That's the new thing. Well, what's a field? Well, we can't really. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of anomalies in fields, and we really can't. Every time we try to describe one, no, because they're going about it the wrong way. use ancient clairvoyance to indicate to you where you should look, and then you can find it. And so as we are evolving, the process of ascension is to go from being a human into an angel, into a Christ-and being, and start to become an angel, and then later become an archangel, and later a time spirit, an archai. And then later we go into other realms higher than that. Now, what people don't understand is that when you talk about the 9 hierarchies, it's kind of like a religion that is anti-scientism. And I consider scientism to be a religion based upon beliefs and fake theories. So when we talk about scientism, or we talk about spiritual science, then we're talking about 2 poles that are quite different. And that's the same thing when we talk about what's beyond our atmosphere and what's in our atmosphere. But we've been told in all the ancient texts, as above, so below, as in heaven, so on earth, as with the gods, so with the humans. If humans become heroes and drink the nectar and ambrosia of the gods, or if they get the ichor of the gods, the blood of the gods. And this is what we're talking about. The earthly and spiritual nutrition stream is about eating ambrosia, drinking nectar, and gaining immortality through it, the elixir of life, gaining immortality through it. But what is ichor? Ichor, when the Greek heroes like Psyche, I'd rather say Psyche, not Hercules. Hercules is made up to a great degree. It's transposed, let us say. So when Psyche drank the ambrosia and drank the nectar and ate the ambrosia of the gods, she was invited to a table up in heaven, wasn't she? To Olympus, top of a mountain. And that's where the gods sit around and they eat. They either eat the apples of Hesperides. They can only be picked by the daughters of
The golden apples.
the golden apples of Hesperides, which gave them immortal life and gave them the immortal life in their ichor, Icher, which is the eternal blood of the gods. Well, that's what you get through this process. You get literally ambrosia, nectar, and that's pituitrin in its 2 forms. And it gives you the eternal understanding that you are an eternal being, which is basically the second stage of initiation: preparation, enlightenment. If you have an absolute intuition that you have reincarnated, then you know you're immortal. Unless it's just a real fluke and it happened. Of course, if you know that you've reincarnated, if you know the resurrection secrets, the mysteries of Christ's resurrection body, which is what John is talking about. This is all about Christ's resurrection body. And by the way, there is only one deeper secret. We're telling you the deepest secrets in all traditions related to the human body, and which then is related to the earth. But there's one secret deeper, and that's our next book, John, which you're working on now. And I'm not going to go there, and because it's so cosmic, most people can't possibly understand it. But I'm working on the science to demonstrate that it's true, and it's getting very close. So what we're talking about here is really the transformation of the human being into a son, because Christ is the being of the Son, the second logos. And then there's an antichrist, an anti-son being. And the sun gives us all life. And all of the cosmos, 99.99% of it is plasma. And plasma, they've now found out that, I could go into this forever, because the new research has indicated lots of facts and data, but you have to interpret it. So I went back to Etheric Formative Forces by Gunther Foxsmith, where a lot of the stuff that I talk about is derived from, but then I connect it to the modern stuff too, because they give you a lot of information to substantiate what the ancients knew and Steiner gave to us in a new form. And that's what John and I and Tyler are doing. We're giving you, in all these 30, 40 books that we're doing, a new doorway into anthroposophy. And what is that? And no matter what anybody says in anthroposophy, if they tell you anything otherwise than what I'm telling you right now, they're wrong. Anthroposophy is a new Christian cosmology that incorporates the 9 hierarchies and the ethers and the Trinity and all aspects of that reflected in the human being. Now, that's what I mean when I say if Christ doesn't sit on your heart, the throne of your heart. If Christ is not in your heart, if selflessness is not in your heart, once you grow old enough that you can be selfless, once selflessness sits on the throne of your heart, you can start to look at things in a new way. Once you've studied the content of spiritual science or whatever spiritual path you want, or even science, it'll lead you back to the same thing. I know this because I was born clairvoyant. I could hear it, I could see it, I could taste it, touch it, feel it, supersensibly experience it, I can experience whether a plasma ball, a ball of lightning, is a being or not. And that's where science is stuck. Are ethers beings? Are they fields? Are they forces? Are they ions? Is it the polarity between positive and negative ions that created the whole thing? God, so they break all this stuff down, but it won't make any sense in its pieces. But if you put it together, it makes perfect sense. I want to go back to what I said in the first talk. One of the images for what we're talking about now, the etherization of the blood, or the earthly and spiritual nutrition, is the image of Christ's sacred heart. And I mentioned that, what is it? It's a heart on fire. Well, that's plasma. And what's below it? Blood dripping onto the earth, showing it's hardening, hardened blood. And then there's the heart, and it's on fire. And what's around it? It's a helical field that looks exactly like DNA, and it's wrapped around the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And it's supposed to be the throne, but the crown of thrones, but the crown of thorns is on the heart.
Crown
and
of
there's
thorns.
crown of thorns. What did I say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crown of thrones.
No, thorns. Not the movie, not the series. So this crown of thorns that's supposed to be on the head isn't there. Where is it? It's on the heart, and it's squeezing the heart. And then there's always either a sword of Michael or the spear of Longinus piercing the heart, because even though they say it, the spear of Longinus pierced the other side of the body. No, I've always said it pierced the heart because of my meditation on the Sacred Heart of Jesus. This is a whole practice for the Catholic Church, probably the most sacred one for Jesus and Mary. And then around that is above that is a flame, inside, and inside of that is a vessel, and inside of that is a cross. But on top, I forgot to mention, and these are all the physical, etheric, astral, and ego bodies of the human being going through transformation in the heart, the etheric heart. But we're going to get to that in a minute. On top, I forgot to mention, on top of the crown, what is there? Top of the cross, which are the 4 elements I talked about, which we can talk about again, which are literally carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen, and phosphorus, the cross of the elements. And then on top of that is a crown. Now, why did I think that was a horrible thing for me to forget? What is a crown? A crown is a halo. Look back to the ancient halos. They didn't go like this, sitting on top of the head as this, what do you call it, just like a disc. No, they were like this. They started here, they went up here, and then they illuminated, right? And where did the tongues of flame come? On top of the head, not into the head, on top of the head. So what is that an image of? That's the image of the halo, but it's also the image, if we talk about the earth, of the aurora borealis. So what is happening in the etherization of the blood can literally be connected to exactly what's happening on the earth with the earth's ethers, but we can explain it in science terms or ether terms. But the reason that in this book, Etherization of the book, there's an entire section teaching you the entire content of this book right here, which, by the way, I know some people who are brave enough to read this book, The Eternal Ethers, A Theory of Everything, but it will change the way you look at everything. And so it's a scary book. And in here, I go into fantastic detail about the ethers. But I put a synthesis of that, a summary, an overview of that into Etherization of the Blood, and also explain the akashic records. or the Akasha ether. And in the previous talk, I held up this book to say that right now, this guy, Irvin Laszlo, the top scientific consultant for the world, even though I don't like his politics, and he only explains one of the ethers, the Akashic ether, but he says there's an ether field, an A field. And this field basically creates what all the ethers, but Einstein said there was a luminiferous ether. And he said that's an a priori assumption. And if you do not say and agree with me there's an a priori assumption, then you cannot understand relativity, because it uses the standard of the movement of light. Because there's the question, what is the first mover? And so what is the first mover? The first mover is the container that was moved in, and that's the Akasha. It can't be understood with the human mind. Okay, it was called Vak in ancient Hindu. It was called the Logos in Christianity. It's called many things, but basically it's a lost word. It's a silent word. It's a spoken word of the divine that never made any noise. But as it echoed, it created all of manifestation. So you can call that, as John pointed out, from Tyler's books on the Gospel of Sophia, that is literally directly connecting you to that through a process of initiation. And it's fantastic, because what we're talking about is a process of initiation. If you were an initiate and you read any of this, or you looked at any of the things that we're talking about here in this book, or in these two talks here, or other talks that we have done, that I have done specifically, that's initiation. Is this knowledge supposed to be given out? Some say Steiner was killed because he gave out the secret of the fifth chamber of the heart. Do I believe that? What's mean these days? M-E-H. I'll do one of those. Don't know. I don't know that. But I do know that we told you what the fifth chamber was, and I just mentioned what the sixth and seventh chamber are. And they're directly connected with the etherization of the blood, because they are sensing their ears. Why do they call them auricles? Because they're on the atrium of the heart, the two atriums of the heart. But they can expand like a wing, literally just like that. They look just like this. They expand just like this. Or they can close down. Oh, every cardiologist I've talked to said, no, they don't do anything. Why is it that the most important things are blind? They blind people who are looking at them. People can't see these things. But once you know this and you go, wait a second, what Steiner's talking about with the etherization of the blood is what happens in the magnetic field of the earth, and the atmospheres of the earth, and in the creation of oxygen, in the creation, yeah, if I get started on this, I'm going to go crazy, but just the creation of oxygen, the creation of water, okay? Air and water. And by the way, oxides are all the rocks we stand on too. So when you say oxygen, you're talking about everything practically in the atomic world. And remember, down here, there are something that looks like an atom. Out beyond our atmosphere, there ain't none of that unless you find solid substances. Now, the solid substances from the moon or from Mars are quite different. And so when we're talking about some meteorites, that's different. But when you get into atomic substances, you're talking about a downgrading of cosmic substances into earthly ethers. And then when you're talking about etherization of the blood, you're talking about going into your heart consciously, warming up your thinking, taking the forces of Kundalini, your spine and all your chakras, aligning your chakras, getting all of them spinning all at once, go up, you send all this energy to the brain, it sends it to the pituitary, sends it down, and starts a permanent cycle that goes from the heart to the brain, to the pineal gland. And what is going to happen? Well, not only you're going to rise into imagination and have moral imaginations, moral inspirations, moral intuitions, but as you do, you literally take on characteristics from the realms of angels, archangels, and archai, and your heart. Now, when you're in utero, your heart wasn't there, but the blood still flowed. Well, how'd that happen if the heart's a pump? Okay, end of conversation. The heart's not a pump. The heart is a sense organ, sensing what the blood is bringing back, sensing what the nerves through the vagus nerve are bringing back, sensing the salts, sensing the nature of plasma in the blood. Now, plasma in the blood is not the kind of plasma I'm talking about. I don't know how to distinguish that. Cosmic plasma, we'll call it. Plasma down here, they'll say that's in protoplasm, that's in the plasma in the blood, that's in this and that. No, no. Now, they've brought some of this cosmic plasma down, but they've made it mostly into medical treatments and weapons. But anyway, what we're changing is the etheric heart, because when you're born, you get a heart from your parents. By the time you turn to 7, it turns into your heart. And from 7 to 14, based upon your education and your environment, you change that into a replica of the whole universe. And it literally is a whole universe. It's got all the stars in it. It's got everything in it. And it came down from above. And so your heart coming up kind of from your inheritance and your heart coming down from above literally slowly goes down into your heart until by 14, you've got control of your etheric heart. And then you start an astral heart. And that goes till age 21. And then for 3 cycles of 7, you're working on that. And then after that, it keeps going up. And if you've developed angelic thinking, archangelic feeling, and intuitive archai or time spirit, in other words, if you get your willpower in line with the spirit of the times, the archangel, or now archai Michael, then you're up here. What happens? You split open the back of your head, and it grows into a halo, like Steiner draws pictures of it. It's like big, really big. And what happens up there? You have infinite capacities to contact the real realms of memory and the etheric. And so when I used to look at my teacher, Gaelic Rinpoche, who was John's teacher too, that he'd be talking long because he's learning, he learned English and he's trying, he's being really interactive with people. And then all of a sudden he goes, okay, now let's start the ritual or the song or the initiation. And the second he starts reciting something by memory, he was no longer in his body. From the second I met this guy, I'd like, whoa, it would throw me back. He would go up into this thing in the back of his head, right? And he recited things that, it's like reciting a 500-page book without one word being wrong, with the exact inflection, the right tone, with the right emphasis, with the full understanding, and so on and so forth. So what did he do? He took moral teachings, Sutrayana, went to Mantrayana using voice, because these things you have to be said in exact tone, exact way, and then went to what is called Vajrayana, which is using visualizations, and sometimes this is reversed, by the way. And then he goes up here to Tantrayana, which means you are taking a copy of that deity that you're worshiping, putting them right on top of your head. And you are working like an angel down here as a human to become just like them, take on all their characteristics, their powers, their tools, their moral this, moral that, all these wonderful spiritual gifts, and you try to become just like them. You emulate them. They're your hero, and you're using them as your way to get to enlightenment. And then when you're done, you send the whole thing up from your heart up into this realm. They call it the illusory realm. One could call it the Akashic records. It's the local antenna for the Akashic records. So when you're talking about what Tyler and I are working on right now, the telepathy tapes, and the fact that they've proven that 10% of all nonverbal autistic children who can't speak are actually geniuses. They used to consider them idiots, so idiot savants. No, they're just savants. They're not idiots. And they type now, and they can just tell you anything you want to know about anything. And they say they go to a hill at night or a field or a mountain or whatever, and they meet with their friends, and sometimes anything they want to know. A teacher from the past or some brilliant, fantastic teacher comes to them and teaches them Hebrew or any language they want, or answers any question they want. And so these children don't have questions, because why? They're not into the lower chakras. They don't ever learn to sometimes even stand upright or walk straight. So the Christ gifts of standing upright, speaking, and thinking never happened with these children. We thought. Me too. I worked with them. I was wrong. That I knew that they were in the aura of Christ, because they never said, if they don't get to walking, if they don't get to speaking, they're still in the aura of Christ. All children up to the age that they speak are usually age 3. And thinking doesn't arrive until you get your organs straight and everything's working, and then you start to think, okay? So some of these children, they thought, well, they don't have walking abilities, they don't have speaking abilities, they don't have thinking abilities. Wrong. They have the greatest thinking abilities, and they have infinite thinking abilities. So the Rain Man and other beings like him who are savants know everything about any particular field of knowledge through resonant morphologically understanding it. I've worked with him. I knew the Rain Man. You could ask, if you ask him a question, you just see him go, zoom, he goes right into this field, looks at it, reads it to you, and he becomes the field, and then he comes back out of the field, okay? So anyone can do that. You can do that for an angel, an archangel, an archai through your vision, your hearing, your speech. And so these practices get you in alignment to connect with the beings who literally sit on your head. That's where all the Tibetan stuff goes. It sits on top of your head. And it goes into the Madala field or the Tushita heaven. Well, what is that? That's a description of the etheric plasmic world. And I'll try to give a description of that later if John lets me.
Yeah, well, getting back to the children that have these psychic abilities, it's not that they're not there, it's that their physical is impaired in its ability to be able to bring it into this realm. It's not that they don't participate in that realm. In fact, by being impaired in this realm, it gives them a greater capacity in that next realm. And so it's really quite fascinating. And it kind of leads into, if you go back to early in Theosophy, the first book that Rudolf Steiner worked with was Light on the Path. And Mabel Collins, who she put this to writing, talked about how it was a result of her traveling in the astral world to a place and being shown these verses that were written on the walls of this temple, right? And so it's this archetypal relationship that one develops in the supersensible world.
Yes, we're
And
just so
so,
excited by these telepathy tapes. We're just
yeah, that's
completely, it makes me go out of my mind because how did I not know this when I worked with the children? I knew a little bit, but I could talk to people through my mind. And why did they not invite me or tell me or in any way get me? Because you know what I would have done? The wrong thing. I would have used them like an oracle to get answers to my questions.
well, I mean, over at Camp Hill, they had that one person there. Camp Hill are centers for the shall we say, the mentally challenged. But they had this one kid there that anytime somebody had to go take a train, they go ask the kid about the train schedule. And they'd be able to tell you, like, if there was some kind of delay in the train and the schedule, or from where? From just because they can contact that. And they say, well, how would that be possible? Well, I go back to the story. Friedrich Riddlemeyer was talking to Rudolf Steiner, and he asked Rudolf Steiner if he was a reincarnation of Euripides, and he said that's very interesting. When did you come up with that? And he told him when he had the thought, and Rudolf Steiner said, at the time I was using the etheric body of Euripides to solve a mathematical problem I was working on. So you have to be able to be very, very expansive in your thinking to be able to, now that we've kind of moved to the next stage, so to speak, in these talks, because with this book, like I said earlier, all the other volumes prepare you to be able to come meaningfully into the content of this book. And likewise, as you continue on, you're going to find that there's levels at which these divine spiritual beings that cohabitate with you in this universe are the ones that brought into being all these things that you interact with on a daily basis. You just don't know it. And in the East, they have a concept called Mula Prakriti. Now, Mula Prakriti is kind of like the Sanskrit word for plasma. And Mula Prakriti means to begin to go forth. So it's that which is existing just across the threshold of the material world. And so scientists, they go, well, it's not material, but we're studying it, but and they keep trying to turn it into a field, like what Douglas is saying. And they don't realize that it's actually beings.
That's the exact point. So we can, through this process we're talking about, and I'll describe the elemental aspects of it now, start from the heart and go up, like I was just saying, you do in all these meditations and all the different spiritual paths, until you're up in a realm above here. So above this, many people say there are 3 chakras. And some would say that's where the spirit, self, life, spirit, man, and the human being actually exist in its potential from the future coming to us. And so every time we put, and that's the same thing that the Tibetans say, you put in the illusory realm so that it can be there for everyone's access and you can access it in the future. They actually literally said that. So what is happening here with the earth? Okay, let's explain the human being. As you're expelling your breath, if you know the secrets that we talked about in the first talk, and you retain the breath, you retain a bit of carbon. That carbon then, when it gets hot enough, you release it, goes to the heart. And then what does it do? It takes oxygen. And remember, oxygen is in water. Oxygen is in the air. It's not just the air, it's in all the rocks. I mean, every oxide is a rock. Silica dioxide, I mean, is most of the crust of the earth. That's really, what is that? Oxygen. So oxygen has the ability to do all kinds of bizarre things people don't think about. But anyway, the oxygen comes here in the carbon in the heart. And what happens? That it heats it up, and that oxygen is related to your physical body. Well, the carbon is related to anything that's organic, right? So anytime you see life, there has to be carbon, because why? Carbon is selfless. It always bonds with everything. And so it bonds with that oxygen. And oxygen is the most material, really, when you look at the big picture. And what does it do? It moves it up the vagus nerve, which is the frontal spinal cord, also called the Centimani tree, or also called the Centimani stone, or the wish-fulfilling stone. Or in the East, they have a thing that they have in all their homes, and it's the chakras. It shows 1, 2, 3, 4 chakras, and it's called a tree. And you say, why do you call it a tree? What's it called? A rishi or Riki, R-E-K-I. And it's everywhere, and no one seems to know what it is. That's frontal spinal column, right? So as you're going up the frontal spinal column, you go from carbon and oxygen in the heart to nitrogen in the throat, to the pineal gland. Now remember, the pineal gland really sits below the pituitary in the 4th ventricle and comes forward to the pituitary up here, okay? So when I say then it goes to the pituitary is actually lower than and easily accessible, but then it goes up and goes, when the pineal gland stands up, it becomes the crown chakra, which they say has 1,000 petals and possibly 3 different levels above it. So once it gets here, it works through speech and sound and nitrogen. And nitrogen basically is what activates the whole world. And then when it gets to the brow chakra, it becomes hydrogen. And hydrogen is a gas that just keeps going out into the world. And then above that is phosphorus, which just keeps going up. As a matter of fact, these elements are found besides helium, hydrogen, some sodium, iron, but particularly carbon, and carbon in its higher forms, which I'll talk about hopefully in a minute. But there's perfected carbon floating around in the dust of the universe. There's no such thing as a void anywhere in the universe. No such thing. It's filled. It's filled with not only what they call akashic field energy, holding it as the space and the vessel, but it's filled with so much dust and so much invisible electricity, you can't believe it. Every single star has a filament of plasma that goes out to other stars. And every star is connected, if it's completely formed, with other stars. And every galaxy is connected to every other galaxy through these what are called ion jets or relativistic jets, and they turn invisible after a certain point, and they have more energy than all the stars in that galaxy. So they're only becoming, this is literally in the last 5 years that they've even understood any of this, okay? So what we're looking at with carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen, and phosphorus, if you go out into the exosphere of beyond the Earth's atmospheres, okay, let's just do a little review here. Troposphere, stratosphere, mesosphere, thermosphere, exosphere, magnetosphere goes around the whole Earth, and it has the sun coming with solar wind, and it creates a big shield, and then out the back it has like a comet of magnetic tail behind it, okay? So out there in the cosmos, it's nothing but plasma. And by the way, the sun isn't a big ball of gas burning up in the middle. No, it is sucking. It's actually a white hole, and science now believes this, that it's a white hole, and that it sucks basically helium and hydrogen and these other elements into itself, and inside itself, it becomes a furnace and kicks out asteroids that come shooting at us on a regular basis. But most of the transformation happens because it's 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit at when you have a solar flare. Out in the corona, out on the edge, it gets the hottest. The surface of the sun is about between 5 to 10,000 degrees, but it can actually reach hundreds of thousands of degrees out in its solar flares. And that's where helium and hydrogen gets changed. And so the solar wind brings with it an immense amount of helium and hydrogen. And helium comes into our system, reaches the magnetopause or the plasmasphere. And because it is plasma coming from the sun, it directly feeds the plasmasphere. And what happens? Helium steps down into O3. And finally, when it reaches down into our atomic world down here, it reaches O2. And then that mixes to become our oxygen that we breathe. So without that transformation happening in the plasmasphere and in the exosphere and in the magnetosphere of the Earth, we have nothing to breathe. And that comes directly from the sun. Now, I'm not going to get into too many details because that gets very complicated, but the hydrogen on the other level working with the moon comes in, creates hydrogen peroxide, and then, which is H3O3, and then becomes H2O water. So from plasma and from what comes in from the sun every 8 minutes when we have a reconnection through a magnetic flux transfer point, and now they know that those magnetic cables, they call them magnetic lines, strings, or tubes, go all the way back to the sun, and instantaneously, in the millions of miles between here and the sun, they instantaneously turn on and turn off every 8 minutes. Isn't that just amazing? So we are fed the plasma that gives us our oxygen and hydrogen through those spheres I just talked about. That's not even our atmosphere yet, but that's what Christ does to protect us. That's like the cloak of Sophia wrapping around the earth to make sure that we don't get burnt alive. Because if we get ultraviolet or even light in its pure form, ultraviolet, gamma rays, cosmic rays, X-rays, it'll kill us. That's very well known. If you stare at the sun too long, it'll kill you. So light in the upper atmospheres and the ionosphere of the earth, now we've gone out of the magnetosphere, out of the plasmasphere, out of a big section of the exosphere, and we're getting down into our atmosphere. When light comes into our atmosphere, because light ether absorbs light, it creates ozone, and that's how we get O3. Without ozone, we wouldn't have this incredibly brilliant crystal, and Aristotle referred to this, and the Greeks referred to it as the crystal sphere around the earth that reflects back the bad rays of the sun, and that is literally true. And if they got through, we'd die. But they do get through. I'll talk about that in a second. So when that light can't get through, hits the atmosphere, it creates ozone. Now we could go a lot into ozone. And what is ozone? But it's O3, which then later drops into O2 because it drops all the way down into the mesosphere, into the stratosphere, into the troposphere. And then we see it collecting at the South Pole in the wintertime, right? Don't get me started on that. So we had the process of oxygen and water being given to us by the solar plasma and also the sun working with the moon that brings us in here. But in the atmosphere, we then get to see plasmoids doing basically what we do in our body. I'll talk about that in a minute. Up at the top of the Earth, we have the magnetic North Pole. People don't know that it's been shifting now for years and is exponentially increasing every single day, moving towards the equator. We went all the way from Greenland in my lifetime, early lifetime, all the way up, all the way over past Russia, and now going down. And the same thing with the South Pole. It's coming up to meet the North Pole magnetic excursion at the equator, and it's getting pretty close. Okay. That happens in the sun every 11 years. So when that is happening, of course, it's all related to the sun, right? Everything's related to the sun. If you don't know that, you don't know anything about the world, period. Everything comes from the sun. All your thoughts, what's that? That's the light of the sun bouncing around in there and coming back as your mental images, right? So what we have here is that in the exosphere, there are plasmoids. And these plasmoids can't be explained by science, but they've been observed thousands and thousands of times. And so they've done studies on them, and they can't figure out what it is because they can pass, and you can do this in the laboratory. They can, and they created weapons, as I mentioned before, and all kinds of medical treatments with this, but they can take a plasmoid that turns into a torus ring, a donut, pass it through solid metal without changing it and pass it back. Well, that's what angels do, don't they? That's what Christ did in his resurrection body. So what you have here is that when you understand the characteristics of plasma, it looks as if it's a nursery and an incubation system when it's in the cosmos to change cosmic helium and hydrogen into our oxygen and water. And in the atmosphere, it changes it into our organic biological substances. And that they descend exactly as Steiner describes this. Now, mind you, when meteorites and stuff hit the Earth, all the dust of the Earth, including all of the microbes and everything that ever lived, went up into the atmosphere, and it becomes dust. And this dust in the thermosphere, particularly where it's anywhere between 3,000 to 5,000 degrees, sometimes 10,000 degrees, right, causes the plasma to get super excited. It starts to whirl and create magnetic ropes that turn into a torus inside of a sphere. And you go, wait a second, that's what the heart is. Correct. And then when you say, but what's in that dust? And they have a whole theory, which is a bunch of nonsense since they've never captured one of these and got to kill it. Because until science can kill it, they don't understand it. So they chase them with their jet planes and everything, can't catch them. Nobody can. They can turn right angles, 180-degree angles. And flat. They have one in one study that dropped from 80,000 feet to 20,000 feet in less than a second and didn't lose its form, left it cosmic comet trail. And then sometimes they run into each other and explode. Sometimes they get together and it looks like they're having sex, and then they have babies and the little babies come out. Sometimes they just come up and like a fish, they just start dropping their babies. This is all happening in our exosphere. Now that it's happening down in our troposphere, people are freaking out. Government doesn't know what they are. And it's just hysterical. What is it? That's what's in your heart, in your head, and in your belly. It's cold fusion and cold fission in your belly, particularly. And these things are what's happening. Cold fission, as you change helium into O3 into O2. Well, hello, it didn't explode. They told us it has to explode to do that. No, it doesn't. It is a biological process that ether does with plasma on its own, or plasma does to ether, we should say. And then when it becomes biological, comes into our atmosphere, we start to see these things. Now, inside of them, you can see, they actually have names for them, things being created where you see the double helix and it creates DNA and RNA, and they couldn't figure out how. Somehow, either from space, where meteorites have that in them, and in fact, C60, C40, C50, C60, C70, C80, all they believe come from chrondites. And so they take DNA and RNA and it ends up on a meteorite. And then that comes into our atmosphere all the time. We get like, 100,000 meteorites a year in our atmosphere impregnating it in this nursery of biology that is happening in our human body that we can't understand. And if we did, I'm sure they'd turn it into a weapon immediately. Oh, that's right. They already have. They have plasma weapons, plasma bombs, plasma bullets, plasma everything. So once we understand this, then you can see that up when you see the aurora borealis, what is that? That's the aura of the earth. Those are gases of hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen that turn the three major colors that rise up out of the earth as free ions, hit the solar wind, and the solar wind lights it up and says, gee, you're just like us on the sun. Isn't that pretty? We have nighttime auroras that don't use the sunlight, that we create our own light. And that's human beings thinking, feeling, and willing, going into the earth. We all go to the core of the earth and go out the North Pole every night when we sleep, no matter where you live on the earth. And as we do, we give to those beings in the spiritual world back ionized particles if we had any higher thinking, feeling, and willing during the day. And so you actually have to start to understand that the reason you see auroras is because of human activity. And sometimes we get coronal mass ejections, large solar flares, no aurora. Why? That's because it has to do with human response to that. So you're seeing the halo, literally in the case of this, of the globe, it looks just like that, like some of the depictions of halos. Or sometimes if you know that the other sheets that you can't see, they come out like this, like a big crown, and they rush in at what's called the auroral electrojet. And in between the plasmasphere and the exosphere, we get to see impregnation of these higher elements into our atmosphere. And then from the thermosphere into the mesosphere, into the stratosphere and the troposphere, we are seeing implantations of what's called complex dusty plasmoids, and the dust are crystals. And that those crystals, if they happen to be from carbon that came in through the auroral electrojet, then they can become literally biological and have DNA and RNA. And this has been proven. So what we're seeing here is the invisible is becoming more visible to us. And when you see lightning, you're seeing the cherubim, the eighth highest in the rank of the nine. Your lightning is the cherubim of harmony, the beings of harmony coming and balancing our weather patterns. So if you never felt awe, wonder, and reverence when you saw lightning, then you probably won't get what I'm talking about. But if you did, and then when the thunder came, that made you even happier. Like I go out and I love that stuff. I climb on top of the roof and try to I have been on top of the pyramid, the Great Pyramid and the Mexican Pyramid, Teotihuacan, yelling at an electric storm when everyone else had to get off, and I'm yelling, take me, take me. And I've seen ball lightning right in front of me, try to jump in it. Real stupid, huh? But anyway, I always knew that this was Ezekiel's chariot that could take me to heaven, like Enoch or Melchizedek or any of the others who translated into heaven. Christ went up into a cloud, in a luminous cloud. His resurrection, his ascension, all of these beings, all these Tibetan teachers, they turn into a rainbow and they just go up into heaven. That's so many people witness it. It's ridiculous. You can't deny it. So how does this happen? We have just told you how it happens. Are there ways to enhance this, to speed up the process? Yes, as they've proven, if you have cancer and you can see the organ and you can see the cancer and they show you exactly what it looks like, you can visualize it, you can get rid of the cancer. So if you can visualize a deity and put it on your head, you can become the deity. If you can visualize the physical material relationship that the earth gives to the spirit, the food it can, and then the spirit gives to the earth the food we need, and that also happens in your human body, then you get the point of what this book is about, the etherization of the blood.
Well, how wonderful. Yes, I mean, ultimately, what we're looking at and what you're referring to in the Western Hermetic Kabbalistic tradition, they have what's called meditation practice called assuming God forms. And that's where you visualize yourself as whatever particular deity form you're manifesting. And that type of visualization can be very effective for certain personality types. But again, I bring us back to that magenta or peach blossom, beautiful orb that's radiating golden light. And if you could hold that in your mind, then what you're doing is you're creating a rainbow bridge.
The Rosicrucians were the first to discover that if you take phosphorus as a gas and you burn it, you can stick your hand in it and it doesn't burn you. So they'd use that in the magic shows all over Europe when this was discovered. And, you know, you can see it in some movies. They show you this and you go, what? That can't be. Yes, phosphorus is a cold flame. So phosphorus in our atmosphere, when light from the sun directly hits it before going through our atmosphere, becomes a cold, invisible flame. What are human beings? A little bit warm, invisible flames.
Well, the key is that you have, again, this is threefold. So you have your wisdom, beauty, and strength. And wisdom by itself is cold. So what we have to do is we have to be able to bring warmth to our wisdom. And that's through the whole mystery of the resurrection body and the moral fire.
Amazing you'd say that. And the telepathy tapes, the lady doing it basically says these children, when they ask them deep questions, speak brutal truth. So they have the wisdom, they just don't have the, you know, the delivery. And oftentimes that's me. I may get the wisdom, but my delivery of it is absolutely brutal and honest. And that's what John's here. John's here to make sure that I have a little bit of warmth in my thinking. But this is so exciting to me. I can't begin to tell you. This is the science of not only the future that we call here on the earth, but it's the future of all spiritual science. So when you understand plasmas, which we don't understand at all because it'll break your brain thinking about it. They pass through metal. If you start thinking about, you know, the rays of the sun and what they do, it'll blow your mind. But here, let me give you one tiny example. Stem cells are certainly floating in our atmosphere. A stem cell in a biological condition is immortal. It's got blast cells in it. It can become anything it wants. So if you get one stem cell in a plasmoid and it's incubating something, what do you got? I don't know. but thinking about these things are like enough to blow your little physical brain into pieces.
Yeah, it's what's called the liberating concept, and being able to work into these things. It's kind of like a force multiplier. But as far as science in its usual way of looking at things, as far as they've got along with this, is they've come up with the concept of the self-organizing universe.
Precisely. And what do they call it? Intelligent design. Well, all I can say is I sure am glad that the scientists decided that God had intelligent design, because where would we be without it? Thank you, John. And thanks for bringing people a step closer to the ethers, to the etherization of the blood, and to plasma.